Let's get started. So I want to start by this. Sources say that hostage negotiations are at a standstill. As we know, Israel accepted the U.S. plan, Hamas is not. Some reports are claiming that Hamas may still accept some altered version of the plan. But U.S. envoy Steve Whitcoff has said it will be a few more days before he comes to the region, and that it is unclear what our next moves will be. So with that in mind, what does this really mean for the nearly 60 hostages, almost 24 who we think are still alive in Gaza? Professor Michael, maybe you can start with that.
Thank you. I think that it is pretty understood that all the efforts that are done, be it by Israel or by the mediator, Whitcoff, is eventually a sort of an extension of phase one of the original agreement, because it is understood that the gaps between Israel and Hamas regarding the end state of phase two are unbridgeable. Israel cannot tolerate the existence of Hamas as a sovereign power, military and governmental entity in the Gaza Strip at the end of phase two, and just the opposite is the purpose of Hamas, and therefore there are efforts to extend phase one. I believe that there is a probability and the feasibility that it will succeed, but in a very limited manner. Eventually, I don't believe that Hamas is willing to release all the hostages, alive and dead, but with their prices that Israel cannot accept. And therefore, I believe that sooner or later, and it might be sooner than later, we will find ourselves in the second round, the military round against Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
So, maybe you can take this. It doesn't, again, it seems that despite all of the excellent efforts that we've made, and certainly on other fronts, maybe more successfully, when it comes to Gaza, we actually have not managed not only to not destroy Hamas, but really to be able to remove its ability to govern in any capacity.
Yes, you're right, but there are two main causes to the unsatisfying results of the 15 months of war. The first one, and the most crucial one, is Biden administration that actually tied at least one hand of Israel behind its back, and Israel couldn't do what it was supposed to do in order to dismantle Hamas and to destroy it. And the second reason is that we were witnessing very, very severe tensions and disagreements, and even more than that, between the military and the political echelons. And I think that in this regard, I think that it was a mistake of the entire security establishment, mainly the military, that rejected the idea of occupying the entire Gaza Strip and establishing a temporary military administration in order to prevent Hamas from reconstituting itself and from any access to the distribution and the supply of the humanitarian aid that was used by Hamas in order to fortify and to establish its control over the territory and the population. But I think that now we are in a different position, with a different administration, with a different experience, and with a different military echelon. And I assume that even the relations between the political and the military echelons will be different. But I would like to add just one more sentence by saying that we have to understand that since the first beginning, the war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip was not limited only to the Gaza Strip or only to Hamas. Hamas is one component of a very broad axis or camp, which is the resistance axis led by Iran. And therefore, from the second day of the war, Israel was deeply involved in a multi-front war, a regional war. Now, if Israel will fail to realize, to implement its objectives with regard to the war against Hamas, which means that Hamas will not be there anymore as a sovereign power, we are going to face a very challenging threats in all the other fronts which are involved in this war. It will not be contained or it will not remain only in the Gaza Strip. And this is something that we must take into consideration as well. And talking about healing the Israeli society, there is no doubt that the hostages is a very deep and bleeding wound in the psyche of the Israeli society. But on the other hand, and at the very same time, the idea that Hamas will remain there in the Gaza Strip is also a bleeding wound.
So let's move over back to you, Professor Michael, before we turn to this investigation that came out. The diplomatic reality is key here. If we go back to war, can Israel manage that from an international perspective? I know we have the backing of Trump. He said, go, let all hell break loose, do what you need to do. But certainly the rest of the world is against us fighting in Gaza. So how do you respond to that? Professor Michael.
Before responding that, I would like to refer to very shortly to what Jeremy said, and I fully agree with him about the change in the strategic and regional position of Israel. And Israel, eventually after this war, has positioned itself as a very strong regional power. And if Israel is a very strong regional power, Israel has to behave as a very strong regional power. And first of all, vis-a-vis Hamas. Secondly, with regard to some remarks that were made by Minister Gallant, I remember some other comments that were made by him that were not necessarily connected to the reality, if remain politically correct. Now, with regard to your question, I would say that the most important thing, if we like it or dislike it, currently is the United States of America. Europe is not important, or at least much less important. I'm talking with regard to the Gaza Strip and the resumption of the war. And the UN is irrelevant in this regard. And therefore, I think that I assume that the international community, mainly the Europeans and the UN, will not like the resumption of the war, and they will condemn Israel. But the American administration is much more important in this regard. And once the state of Israel, the government, will decide to resume the war because there are no other options, I believe that the rest of the world will follow or will align itself with the Americans, and I believe that it will be a very short war. I mean, it will not be another 15 months.
Michael, can you take that question as well? Really looking at it from a security perspective, what does need to change to ensure that this cannot happen again?
I think that what the inquiries eventually show is that we faced, first of all, a historical problem. The problem did not begin on October 7th or a day before, okay? We are talking about problems that began and existed in the system long before October 7th and led us as a system to the October 7th, or to the results of the October 7th. And I would say that there are three levels of problems. The first one is, I would say, operational problem, okay? That even without having an intelligence indication or early alert, the forces, the IDF forces along the border should have been prepared much better than they were actually. We have in the second level a problem of discipline among the IDF units, and by the way, we saw it even during the war itself. Too many problems of discipline or absence of discipline or weak discipline, broken discipline among the rows, among the troops. And the third level is the intelligence and the conceptual level, actually two distinguished levels with regard to the way that we perceived the situation, the reality, Hamas, and our underestimation with regard to the capacities of Hamas and their, I would say, the strength of their will and ideology, and the way that they are able to translate their will and ideology to capacities. And I think that we will need a very long series of corrections and changes that must take place. but they will not be able to do that without, first of all, accomplishing the inquiries. I think that there is a sort of a trust crisis between the society and the IDF with regard to the inquiries themselves, and more than that, there is a crisis in the IDF itself between the operational level and the supreme command of the IDF. And in order to correct it, I think that some of the inquiries should be done once again by other people and by under different leadership, and we will have a long way to do in this regard.
For sure. And unfortunately, that is all of the time that we have this evening. I would love to keep the conversation going, but I do want to thank both of you, Ambassador Jeremy Sakharov and Professor Kobi Michael, for being here this evening.